the largest amount of recommendations we've had at any inquest.
Tonight, recommendations from the James Smith Cree Nation inquest are in.
I think we are focused on moving forward in a good way.
The Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth released their annual report.
Enhancing healthcare access is very important.
And a new proposal for expanding all-weather roads in Manitoba. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. The jury in the inquest into the stabbings on James Smith Cree Nation and Weldon gave their recommendations last night. Reporter Rachel May was there.
Daryl Burns lost his sister Gloria in the attacks on September 4th, 2022. He said that this inquest provided an opportunity to honor those who lost their lives.
So if my sister's death means that something positive is going to come out of this, then her legacy is going to live on.
After 2.5 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberations, there were a total of 29 recommendations made, 14 from the jury and 15 from the presiding coroner. 4 groups received recommendations from the jury. At the top of the list, the Correctional Services of Canada. They were asked to provide 1 consistent support worker per inmate, as opposed to multiple support workers for 1 inmate. One of the main recommendations for James Smith Cree Nation was they should establish their own police force. For the RCMP, they need to have the photos in their database stamped prominently with the date the photo was taken. The final group given recommendations from the jury was the Federal Ministry of Public Safety. They were encouraged to make a more efficient alert system available across Canada whenever dangerous offenders are on the loose. Presiding coroner Blaine Bevan had 15 recommendations of his own. For the RCMP, he recommends meeting with James Smith leadership regularly. For James Smith leadership, he recommends that they let the community know when someone is unlawfully at large. Bevan also said the Correctional Services of Canada has to improve the way it releases offenders back into the community once a sentence is served. Clive Wayhill is the chief coroner of Saskatchewan.
We've had some inquests as high as 20 recommendations. Since I've been the chief coroner, this is certainly the largest amount of recommendations we've had at any inquest.
Saskatchewan RCMP Commanding Officer Rhonda Blackmore says that the force will be working to address the concerns.
We're going to look at all of those recommendations, I think, because there is a lot of positivity that can come out of those recommendations.
Wayhill says that his office will let the public know when and how the recommendations are being addressed, a process that can take between 3 and 6 months. Rachel May, APTN National News, Melfort, Saskatchewan.
Thanks, Rachel. To Iqaluit now, where today the special interlocutor on missing children and unmarked graves, Kimberly Murray, finished her first Northern gathering on unmarked burials. Trevor Wright has more.
This week, the special interlocutor, Kimberly Murray, connected to Inuit survivors of residential schools. It's the first such gathering on unmarked graves in the Arctic. It's also the last, as Murray's mandate ends in June of this year, with time needed to make recommendations based on these gatherings. Navalik Tologanik was born in Cambridge Bay. She was sent to Stringer Hall, a Nuvik's residential school. She says a specifically Inuit gathering is needed.
Well, for myself, like I spoke and asked questions about if we can have another Inuit gathering, specifically Inuit and elders and survivors gathering in Nunavut. Because like I said earlier, there's not enough of our elders here, survivors.
In addition to residential schools, an estimated 5,000 Inuit were sent down south to tuberculosis sanatoriums in the 50s and 60s, following a similar trend of long-term removals without word or warning to families. Families were not informed when someone died. A lack of records or contact is a long-standing issue with many Inuit survivors.
I think the government likes to hide things, hide files, hide names, hide their bad doings of what they're not supposed to be doing, or otherwise it's just genocide. I don't know. I don't want that to happen to my kids or my family anymore, and I want to stop it. Try and help anyways.
Murray says the Inuit experience will be taken into account on her recommendations.
We recognize that each of our gatherings are unique, and certainly it's very unique being in the north, and the experience of Inuit with the hostel system, with the TB sanatoriums is quite unique to Inuit, and so there has to be unique responses to address the challenges that they're facing.
There were 21 TB facilities that operated across Canada and 14 residential schools in what became Nunavut. According to the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, an estimated 15 children died in Nunavut residential schools. However, due to limitations on records, the number is expected to be higher. Trevor Wright, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
To Ottawa now, where the NDP are pushing back against Alberta Premier Danielle Smith's policy announcement restricting the rights of transgender youth. Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley and other NDP MPs held a press conference in Ottawa to address the issue on Thursday. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley says the provincial government is restricting the medical rights of one of society's most marginalized groups.
I'm so deeply, deeply concerned for what this means for transgendered and other marginalized youth within the queer community. We know that that houseless children disproportionately come from those communities because the relationships with their families have broken down.
Smith made the policy announcement on social media on Wednesday. Among the new changes, Alberta will ban gender reassignment surgeries for youth under 18 years old, prevent hormone therapy for the purpose of gender affirmation for children under age 16, and require parental consent for preferred name and pronouns for students under 16. Edmonton NDP MP Blake Desjardins, who is the first member of Parliament to publicly identify as Two-Spirit, says the policy changes are draconian.
And we know exactly the outcomes of these kinds of programs when young people are targeted. The outcomes of these programs are horrific, whether it's the program that tells them their identity isn't real, or if it's the program that tells them that they ought not to exist in these spaces. This continues in that tradition.
James Smith is a family doctor from the Saddle Lake Cree Nation in Alberta, who also identifies as Two-Spirit. Makokis works directly with trans patients and says pursuing a gender-affirming path is not one that is made without a lot of thought, whether the patient is young or old.
It's really important to know that people don't do this lightly. It's something that they've known their entire life. And clinicians do thorough assessments of ensuring that, people, when they say they're trans, and we just ensure that there's no medical contraindications to doing so. And there is a thorough assessment process of that.
He says regardless of how the Alberta policy change shakes out, it won't change the work he does.
I want to affirm to my patients, my Indigenous patients, my non-Indigenous patients, my gender diverse patients, my trans patients, that I will continue to practice trans and gender affirming care on the reserve in a place where we have our own jurisdiction and continue to prescribe these life-saving medications that absolutely make a difference.
Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
To Manitoba now, where the Provincial Advocate for Children and Youth released their annual government compliance report today. Some recommendations for children's rights have seen progress, while others have had no movement for years. Sav Jonesa has more on what the report looks into.
How is the Manitoba government ensuring children's rights in the province? That's a question answered by a new compliance report issued today by the Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth, also known as MACY. It looks at the ways the provincial government has progressed implementing recommendations made by MACY since 2018. They focus on how children's lives can be improved through provincial public services.
Since the Advocate for Children and Youth Act came into force in 2018, MACY has released 12 special reports in which a total of 80 recommendations have been issued to address pressing children's rights concerns in Manitoba.
Recommendations cover areas like education, mental health, and justice. Manitoba advocate for children and youth, Sherry Gott, says this year saw some encouraging results.
We found that overall compliance with recommendations has improved since the last monitoring cycle and generally over the last 4 years. 32% of the recommendations that have been assessed are now fully complete. 75% of the recommendations now have a positive or mid-level assessment, which is an increase of 15% from last year. 98.5% of the recommendations now have demonstrated actions toward their implementation.
Though progress has been made, Gott points out that isn't true for all recommendations. She says 48% of all recommendations being assessed for the second, third, or fourth time have recorded no progress. These include recommendations for a long-term residential mental health treatment center for youth and developing anti-racist education initiatives in schools, as well as multiple recommendations for disability services. With the new NDP provincial government taking office after the assessment period, Gott says only time will tell how they will measure up against the previous government's compliance.
There is hope. There is hope, I must say that. As you know, that our office is an independent, nonpartisan office. I think we are focused on moving forward in a good way. While it's too early to review the progress of the current government, we look forward to working with them in a collaborative manner.
Sahab Jonza, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Meanwhile, Indigenous youth in Manitoba will see further investment in their mental health, thanks to expanded funding by the provincial government. Earlier this week, the Manitoba government announced more than $800,000 in additional funds to community-based programs focused on youth mental health. Over $500,000 of that will go to the Indigenous Youth Mentorship Program. In IT, university and high school students manage weekly after-school programming for younger students focused on health and culture. Students get involved with physical activity through traditional Indigenous games and learn about nutrition and diabetes prevention. The program will operate in 24 new sites over the next 3 years, thanks in part to the funding. 15 of those will be in northern and rural areas across the province. Well, First Nations in Northern Ontario are experiencing a suicide crisis. We'll be joined by the Grand Chief of 49 of those First Nations after the break. Welcome back. First Nations leadership in northern Manitoba are calling on the provincial and federal government to build an all-season road to remote communities. The proposed 252-kilometer road will start from an existing road in Barons River First Nation to St. Teresa Point, which is currently only accessible by winter roads or by air. The chiefs of the two communities say with warm weather conditions, the current winter roads are only accessible for a short amount of time during the year. Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, Kathy Merrick, says an all-weather road would give members better access to fuel, food, housing supplies, and health services.
Enhancing healthcare access is very important. We can no longer afford premature deaths in our First Nations because of accessibility to healthcare. We all know our people are bombarding the hospitals due to that lack of access of medical attention in their First Nations.
An emergency meeting was held in Ottawa last week over the alarming number of deaths by suicide in Anishinaabe Nation territory. NAN represents 49 First Nations in Northern Ontario. For more on the suicide crisis, we're joined now by NAN Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler. Grand Chief Fiddler, great to have you here in studio with us to talk about such a difficult subject. Can you give us a sense of just how big of a crisis this is?
Well, just to show or tell your audience about just how urgent this is. Just last week when we were in Ottawa, last Wednesday, having this very important discussion with senior officials, federal ministers. The next day, we were having a debrief in the meeting room, and when I got a phone call from one of our communities that another young girl had taken her life that morning. So, as we're having these important discussions and doing this important work, that we are losing our youth, our children. And to me, that just spoke to just how serious this is and how urgent this is.
Do you have a sense of what some of the root causes behind this crisis are?
Yeah, I don't think we can point to one or two reasons why we are losing so many of our youth to suicide, but we do know that there's the tragic, the violent colonial history that all of us carry, with the forced removal of our children to residential schools, and also through the child welfare system, and also in the NAN territory, and I know in northern Manitoba as well. We also have the legacy of the church and the pedophile that they employed in the 70s and 80s, named Ralph Rowe, who was also a Boy Scout leader and was also given a plane to travel to many of our communities, and the number of children that he abused in the 20 years that he worked in our territory. So we have all these things that have happened to our children and families, and a lot of that you can point to, what we're seeing now with the sexual abuse and the violence that we're seeing is rooted in so many of those things that have happened to our people over these many generations.
As you mentioned, there was that emergency meeting last week with First Nations leaders and the federal government. Did you come out of that meeting feeling hopeful?
I think so. I think it was good, first of all, just to bring together senior officials from the federal government, and we did also have some of our leadership there as well, and some of our experts, to have this very important discussion to first of all talk about the need for immediate relief, which is something that our chiefs have been asking for because of the numerous losses that we've suffered over the last few months in the NAN territory. That our communities are tired, that they've depleted the resource that they have to work with to try to support their children and youth and families. That we need to have a surge in supports, immediate surge in supports to support our leadership as they grapple with this epidemic.
Grant Chief, as you mentioned, the need for immediate relief. What do you see as the next steps here?
Yeah, that's what we're working on right now, is what does that immediate relief look like? So we're looking at, for example, human resources to have trained mental health workers go into our communities to provide relief for the staff that are there that need a break, that need a rest, but also financial relief. A lot of our communities expressed, for example, that they've spent so much of their own money, which they don't necessarily have. They're not funded for crisis supports, but they've had to spend money to support families that are in these crisis situations. For example, one of our communities, one of our smaller communities, over the last year spent around 1.3 million on crisis supports, and they don't have that in their budget. They just have a small core band support funding, and so they need financial relief as well, so that they can effectively deal with crisis events as they happen in their communities.
And Grand Chief Fiddler, again, appreciate you taking some time for us here today to discuss.
Thank you for the invite.
And Anishinaabe Aski Nation chiefs will be holding their winter assembly next week in Thunder Bay and discussing the matter further. A new episode of Nation to Nation is coming up right after the news. We've got a preview for you on the other side of this break. Stick around. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Edward Martin sent in this setting sun from Richibucto, New Brunswick. But the real hero just might be his friend Mandy Barnaby, who encouraged Edward to send in his photo. Thanks to both Mandy and Edward. Keep those photos coming to share at aptn.ca for our photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, +1 with snow in Halifax, -1 and snow in Fredericton. 18 below in Kuujjuaq, -21 and sunny skies in Nain. +3 in Montreal, snow and -2 in Val-d'Or. +4 in Sault Ste. Marie, cloudy and 2 below for North Bay. 0 in Thunder Bay, -2 and cloudy in Sioux Lookout. Sun's out and 5 above for God's Lake and Norway House. +2 in Winnipeg, sunny and 4 for Dauphin. +7 for Regina and Saskatoon. 4 in Meadow Lake, La Ronge, and Buffalo Narrows. In northern Alberta, cloudy and 6 for high level, 2 in Fort McMurray. 5 in Edmonton, +12 for Lethbridge. 9 in Vancouver, cloudy and 11 for Kamloops. 9 for Prince George, 6 above in Smithers. -30 with snow in Old Crow, 13 below in Whitehorse. -9 and flurries in Yellowknife, 31 below with snow in Norman Wells. -24 with snow in Sax Harbor, snow and 22 below in Paulatuck. -10 in Chesterfield, 4 below for Arviette. -26 in Resolute and Igloolik. Over to our Ottawa studio now, where Annette Francis is standing by with a preview of tonight's episode of Nation to Nation.
Tonight on Nation to Nation, homelessness is in a state of crisis across the country. Studies show Indigenous people are 11 times more likely to be unhoused. We'll talk to NDP MP Blake Desjardins about what it's going to take to change that. The cause is driven by many factors.
Child and family services system we have in this country is deplorable. These systems are alive and well. The racism is alive and well. That's why we need a comprehensive national emergency on Indigenous housing.
Also, a surge of mining claims in Ontario has many First Nations scrambling to keep up. They're now asking the province for a moratorium.
It could help us get on track to how we're going to deal with a lot of this issue. We could certainly sit down and talk with the province about some of these issues, and of course the federal government also, because they also play their part within this.
There's that and more later on Nation to Nation.
Thanks, Annette. Looks good as always. You can catch Annette and Nation to Nation right here in about 90 seconds time. We're all out of time for your APTN National News for this Thursday. You can find much more over on our website. That's aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward, Marcy Miigwech. Thanks for being with us. We will see you back here tomorrow.